Hello and welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be covering the Ranger class as presented and updated in the 2024 Player's Handbook. Now, here is our agenda for this video. I'm going to kind of give an overview and talk about what I think that the role of the core class is, and then we'll go through all the class features from level 1 to level 20, and I've broken this down into 5 level sections to make it easier. And importantly, after we talk about level 1 features, I'm going to talk about a potential issue and that the 2024 Ranger has in particular that I'm going to call the concentration bottleneck. After all of that, we'll talk about multiclassing the Ranger, and then I'll go into a summary and give the class some ratings as a whole. Now, in this video, as in the rest of these videos in this series, I'm not going to be covering any of the subclasses in depth. This is focused on the core class. Now, I know the Ranger as a class is one that's been a bit controversial in the community. The community is divided as to whether or not it's good. A lot of people don't like the design direction of the Ranger. And so in this video, I'm going to be pointing out some of the hurdles that the core class has, but I'm not going to be proposing any kind of changes or homebrew anything. I'm not trying to change things. I actually think the class is actually mechanically better than it was in 2014, even though there's some clunkiness. And my goal with this video is really to convey how the class runs and what you can do as a player with the class to get the most out of it. All right, so let's jump into the overview and role of the Ranger. So the Ranger is a hybrid martial and caster, or a half caster. They are the second one, the other being the paladin, and they are based on dexterity and wisdom. Now, the Ranger as a class is a mix of druid in terms of spellcasting, fighter martial abilities, as well as rogue kind of skills and expertise. So they've got a mix of martial ability, spellcasting, again, mostly druid spells, and a bit of things that are going to boost your skills. And so, therefore, if I was going to describe what the core Ranger is at its whole, the Ranger is a generalist. And I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but the Ranger isn't really the best at anything, at any particular pillar. However, that said, they are decent at a lot of things. They've got decent damage, they're reasonably durable, they've got some support and control abilities, and they're especially good at survival and exploration type things, although they're not necessarily going to beat out a character that's more specialized on those things. In the last one, under the 2014 rules, I said they were a durable damage dealer, and this is true, but that's kind of just one aspect of what the class is. One of the things with Ranger is, especially if you're playing a Ranger in a large group, you're not really necessarily going to be the best at any given thing, but you might be the second best at a bunch of things, so you'll be able to be involved in a lot of different things. One of the other strengths of the Ranger is that if you have a small party, the versatility and flexibility of this class is going to be one that's going to be capable of covering a lot of different roles, just due to the nature of how the class works. All right, the classic archetypes for Ranger are either archery with a bow or a crossbow, that kind of thing, or dual wielding. So usually with a Ranger, you go dexterity primary, but you can also potentially pull up a strength primary build or even a wisdom primary build with one of their fighting styles, or the magic initiate feat to get Shillelagh or a multi-class dip to get that feat. And additionally, the Rangers are one of those classes that's naturally multiple attribute dependent. You typically want a decent dexterity, especially if you're going to be attacking with it with either, finesse weapons or ranged attacks. And if you're not going to be using your dexterity to attack with, you usually want at least 14, not only to get the most out of your class medium armor proficiency, but also potentially to qualify to multi-class. As a Ranger, you also typically want a decent constitution to help you concentrate on your spells. Many of the Ranger's best spells require concentration, although you can get away with it being lower, and I have done a video on how you can dump your constitution. You can check a link out to it up there, and Ranger is potentially a good candidate for that. Additionally, if you want to use the new Great Weapon Master feat with a longbow or a heavy crossbow, you'll need at least 13 strength to qualify for that feat, and you probably want a decent wisdom for some of your spells, although it's not strictly necessary, as the Ranger does have some self kind of buff type spells, but you will also need at least 13 wisdom if you want to bail out of Ranger and multi-class. So a lot of potential stats that a Ranger might want depending on the build, and that can mean, again, that you're multiple attribute dependent. All right, so here is the class table of all the features the 2024 Ranger has. Now, the Ranger has seen some pretty significant changes, including incorporating and adapting and modifying some of the Tasha's features, and there's also the big changes to how half-casters in general work under the 2024 rules. Many of the high-level features do involve Hunter's Mark, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more after the level 1 features when we talk about the Concentration Roadblock. There are a few features that were lost too, namely Vanish and Land Stride, and the class invisibility feature was pushed back from level 10 when you got it in Tasha's to level 14 now. However, they also lost some of the Tasha's features that gave them kind of these ritual spells always prepared. However, with the changes to ritual casting, this kind of somewhat is going to fix itself, and I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up here. All right, so first up, boxed in green here, all of these features here are new features. So we've got Favored Enemy, Weapon Masteries, like a lot of martials. We've got Expertise at level 9, and then Relentless Hunter and Precise Hunter at levels 13 and 17. All right, so next up, boxed in blue, these are all the features that have changed. So a lot of features in the core class have changed. The spellcasting has seen some slight to significant changes. One of the big ones is in how the Ranger prepares their spells. A level 20 Ranger under the 2014 rules would only have 11 spells, and the 2024 Ranger is going to have at least 15 depending on your subclass. Deft Explorer has been pushed back to level 2. This was a Tasha's feature. The fighting style is now opened up to more things. Roving has seen some slight changes. This was a Tasha's feature. Tireless was also a Tasha's feature that has seen a little bit of changes. Nature's Veil, their level 14 class feature, has seen some changes, and they've also seen some changes to their level 18 Feral Senses and to the class capstone Foe Slayer. All right, so features at level 1. So the primary ability scores, and these are the ones that you will need as a Ranger to multiclass in or multiclass out, are Dexterity and Wisdom. You'll need 13 plus on those. The hit dice is a D10. They are proficient in Strength and Dexterity saves, which are not really the greatest. They are one of the few classes that gets proficiency in 3 skills out of the following list: Animal Handling, Athletics, Insight, Investigation, Nature Perception, Stealth, and Survival. They're proficient with simple and martial weapons, as well as light armor, medium armor, and shields. There are no changes here from the 2014 version in terms of opening proficiencies. And remember, you don't necessarily care about your class primary stats if you're not going to multiclass. So a strength kind of heavy weapon using Ranger is a potential option that you have. These are one of the few classes that get medium armor or better and weapon masteries along with potentially spells. Paladin and Fighter are the other ones that are, good armor and weapon masteries along with Barbarian, and of the other classes, only Paladin has spells. All right, features at level 1. So the Rangers now get spell casting at level 1, whereas they used to get it at level 2. So their primary ability is Whiz, and they can use a Druidic Focus, and you get 2 prepared spells. And a new change here is that you can replace one of your prepared spells every time you take a long rest. So this is pretty huge. The Ranger used to only be able to swap out their spells when they leveled up. Additionally, any spell that has the ritual tag now can be cast as a ritual, and this includes the Ranger. So the Ranger can now potentially ritual cast spells without spending slots. The Ranger spell list, generally speaking, has the most overlap with Druid, although they do have a few kind of unique spells. One of the other changes here, importantly, is the Ranger now counts your level over 2 rounded up for your caster level. So a single level of Ranger, if you want a multi-class, it does count as 1 full caster level, where it wouldn't count as anything before. Additionally, if you're using older content, Searing Smite is on your spell list per Tasha's, and this spell has gotten an update. So depending on what is going to be on your spell list, whether or not you're just using the 2024 Player's Handbook is important, as there are some good spells out of like Xanathar's for Absorb Elements and Zephyr Strike that aren't in the 2024 content just yet. Next ability that we get here is Favored Enemy. And so what this feature says is that we always have the Hunter's Mark spell prepared. So this will be a total of 3 prepared spells, 2 that you get to pick and Hunter's Mark. And we can cast it twice without spending a spell slot per long rest. And the number of times we can cast it without spending a spell slot is basically going to be equal to our proficiency bonus if we were a pure class Ranger. This is essentially 2 extra first level spell slots that are dedicated to Hunter's Mark. At these early levels, that is a big deal. You're probably going to be wanting to use Hunter's Mark offensively, and having these free uses is going to free up your other slots and preparations for potentially defensive spells, offensive spells, or utility and healing and that kind of a thing. So a very nice thing to have here at these early levels. And finally, like most of the marshals, rangers get weapon masteries here at level 1. They get 2. This is all they'll ever get throughout their entire career, but you can swap any and all of them out on a long rest. So if you get a different weapon that doesn't match a mastery you have, and it's a nice, like, good, strong magical weapon, you can always swap your mastery into that one. So, as you can probably tell, Rangers do get quite a bit at level 1 now. They can be potentially a pretty desirable dip for this reason, especially if your stats match. And it's actually going to be worth considering for a lot of classes that might have considered Cleric before, because you're going to meet the dexterity requirement for the class simply by having enough to get the most out of the medium armor. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this concentration bottleneck problem that the Ranger class is going to have a bit of issues with. So the first big thing here is the Hunter's Mark spell requires concentration. And our other more powerful spells that we'll get later from our class spellcasting feature also require concentration. So we can't use both Hunter's Mark and our higher level spells at the same time. However, some of the class features that we're going to get at later levels will require us to be using Hunter's Mark, and therefore you must choose between your strong, powerful spells on the one hand and Hunter's Mark and the associated features on the other. Additionally, some classes also have features that require Hunter's Mark, and these subclasses are going to face this challenge that I'm about to lay out to a much greater degree. Some Ranger spells have actually had concentration removed to try to help with this. I think the designers thought, if we have slots saved that we don't have to spend on Hunter's Mark, we might be able to use our slots to cast kind of damage spells and that kind of thing. Some examples of spells that have had their concentration requirement removed are Hail of Thorns, Barkskin, Magic Weapon, and Lightning Arrow. And there's some other spells that Ranger gets that didn't require concentration, like Conjure Barrage and that kind of thing, that are damage options. However, on a half caster, these spells on a Ranger aren't really kind of relevant for the damage dealing role because by the time you get them, they're not really like what a full caster dedicated to doing that is going to be able to do. You can be an okay backup, but also due to the fact that your spell slots as a half caster are much more limited than those on a full caster, you really want those slots that you do have to have a high impact. So this kind of style where you use your concentration for Hunter's Mark and then your high level spells for things that don't require concentration, I'm on the fence as to whether or not it's actually good and worth pursuing. So let's move on here. So some things I do want to say. So Favored Foe, which is our concentration-free Hunter's Mark castings, are fantastic and great at early levels when you want to be using Hunter's Mark most of the time, as it frees up your spell slots to use other things, probably like utility or support things. And even though they tried to make using your spell slots for damage easier, again, it's just not really very efficient. The next point I want to make is that the features that actually modify Hunter's Mark don't come, at least for the core class, until levels 13, 17, and 20. Most campaigns never actually reach these levels, or if they do, they barely spend any time there. From a lot of surveys I've seen, most campaigns end in the level 10 to 12 range if they start at level 1. So the benefits are at level 13, damage can't break your concentration on Hunter's Mark. Level 17, you get an advantage against the target that you mark with Hunter's Mark. And at level 20, Hunter's Mark's damage dice is a D10 instead of a D6. In summary, I think these benefits are, generally speaking, pretty minor. Advantage is relatively easy to obtain. We have a lot of charges, so I'm not really worried about dropping concentration and having to recast it. And then a D10 versus a D6 damage is like 2 damage per hit. It's not really that much. And so, another thing to point out here is the 2014 Ranger didn't actually get any class features at all at levels 13 and 17. So it's not like you lost something to get these improvements to Hunter's Mark. It's basically like a free lunch. But that said, a bunch of this free food might be a bunch of Brussels sprouts. But that said, it's not like nothing. I think in summary, these features provide you with a good backup plan in Hunter's Mark when you need to conserve your resources, like you have a long adventuring day, maybe you dropped your big concentration spell because you took damage and there's only a few rounds left and you still want to be able to contribute. It might be a good time to use Hunter's Mark. Or maybe you've had, a long adventuring day. You want to save your best resource for the last fight or two. And so you use Hunter's Mark in those other fights to kind of conserve resources. So I don't think the best thing to do with most Rangers is going to be using Hunter's Mark as your main plan. But again, it is a good secondary plan, and it's not like we lost anything to actually get these features to improve it because we just didn't get anything before. All right, moving on to level 2. Rangers get their fighting style, and they now can have access to all the fighting style feats in the game, or the Druidic Warrior option, which was taken out of Tasha's, basically gives you a few Druid cantrips. It's cool that this is wide open to any feat in the game now. Like under the 2014 rules, Rangers didn't get access to fighting styles like Great Weapon Fighting, for example. Deft Explorer was moved back to level 2 from where it was in Tasha's, but it's basically the same. It gives you expertise in one of your skills, and you learn 2 languages of your choice. Moving on to level 3, Rangers get their subclass, and the 4 subclasses presented in the Player's Handbook, the 2024 Player's Handbook, are the Beastmaster, the Fey Wanderer, the Gloomstalker, and the Hunter. Now, none of these are new. All of them are reprints from one book or another, with the Beastmaster and the Hunter coming from the original Player's Handbook, and the Gloomstalker coming from Zenithar's, and I believe the Fey Wanderer comes from Tasha's. Some of these subclasses do get a spell list, and it gives them just a single first level spell that's always prepared, and you get your kind of core subclass abilities. All these subclasses are pretty darn similar to their most recent releases, like the Tasha's version of the Beastmaster, although Gloomstalker has actually seen some pretty significant nerfs and reworks that are kind of in line with the burst damage nerfs to player characters as a whole across the board. The Hunter class in particular is the one from the Player's Handbook that depends the most on Hunter's Mark, and it's been reworked to be a little more flexible, although I think it's still largely kind of a dull, boring subclass, at least in my opinion. Moving on to level 4, Rangers get their first ability score improvement or feat. No changes here. Generally speaking, Rangers want to get a weapon feat or 2 to increase their damage, but as a Ranger, you're really actually stretched pretty thin on feats, as there are a lot of things that you might want. You might want things that boost your saves or other defenses, and usually boosting your wisdom is usually one of your last concerns, unless you're doing a wisdom primary build, which are a lot more accessible now. This kind of problem of having to spread out your stats and things is a little bit easier due to all the 2024 general feats boosting a stat, but it can still be pretty difficult. Moving on to level 5, Rangers are up to 2nd level spells, and you now have 3 free uses of Hunter's Mark for Long Rest, and you get extra attack. Ranger does have some standout spells at 2nd level, like Aid, Pass Without Trace, Spike Growth, Summon Beast, and here at level 5 with extra attack and 2nd level spells, I think Ranger is kind of at their peak relative strength. If you're going to be doing the dual wield Ranger, you would now potentially have 4 attacks per turn, 3 out of your attack action thanks to the Nick Mastery, and then 1 if you took the dual wielder feat with your bonus action, but you're not really going to get any extra scaling past that for a long time. So Rangers at like levels 1 to 5 are very, very good. So let's move on to level 6. So at level 6, all the Rangers get is roving. So this is a feature that was brought over from Tasha's and modified a little bit. So it says our speed increases by 10 feet while we aren't wearing heavy armor. And then we also have a climb speed and swim speed equal to our speed. This bonus used to only be 5 feet, and it didn't care about what armor you're wearing. But a 10 feet speed boost is pretty good. And you're not going to be wearing heavy armor unless you multiclassed or went strength primary and took a feat to get heavy armor proficiency. So it's a little bit limiting for those strength rangers that might want to use heavy armor. However, the climb and swim speed should still work if you're wearing heavy armor. There's nothing on that sentence that says it won't. Moving on to level 7, Rangers get a subclass feature. The subclass features vary a little bit, well, quite a bit, but generally speaking, the ones at this level are pretty good and are typically defensive or utility focused and don't usually prioritize increasing your damage unless you can figure out some clever ways to use them. Moving on to level 8, it's our second ability score improvement or feat and nothing else. The Ranger used to get a feature called Land Stride at this level that let you ignore difficult terrain and a little bit of other things like damage from non-magical plants and thorns. This feature has been removed. It was pretty situational, but I thought it was nice, although I understand why they removed it because it does seem kind of superfluous, but it is something that the Ranger lost. Moving on to level 9, Rangers get 2 additional skill expertises here that they didn't get before, and we're up to 3rd level spells and 4 free castings of Hunter's Mark per long rest. The 3rd level spells that Ranger gets are quite good, at least the concentration ones are. You've got things like Conjure Animals and Summon Fae for standouts, and there's some also pretty powerful kind of ritual spells here as well. Moving on to level 10, Rangers get Tireless. This is a feature that was brought over from Tasha's. So as a magic action, we can give ourselves a D8 plus our Wisdom modifier, temporary hit points, and we can use this number of times per long rest equal to our Wisdom modifier. And when we finish a short rest, our exhaustion level, if any, decreases by 1. Very minor change here. This used to be proficiency bonus times. We also lost our Nature's Veil invisibility feature that we got here, although this has been moved back to level 14. Moving on to level 11, the Rangers get a subclass feature. And this is a point where the subclass features really need to contribute a lot in order for the Ranger to feel competitive on damage. Because the core class stopped really scaling at least our weapon damage way back at level 5, subclass features at this level typically, fortunately, are a damage bump to help get you going in tier 3. The power level varies quite a bit from subclass to subclass, and this is typically the first real damage spike we've gotten since level 5, other than our 3rd level spells, which are impactful if you pick the right concentration ones. Moving on to level 12, it's ability score improvement number 3 and nothing else. Once again, the universally sucky level at level 12. You should probably have your main stat capped either at level 8 or with the feat that you take here, depending on whether you took general feats or a +2. At level 13, it is 4th level spells, and we get Relentless Hunter, as well as having 5 free castings of Hunter's Mark per long rest. And Relentless Hunter is a new feature. We didn't used to get any features here, and it says that taking damage can't break our concentration on Hunter's Mark. Now, the selection of 4th level spells, though the list is generally shrinking here at this point, Conjure Woodland Beings is probably the biggest standout for me on the list. It's worth noting that 6 out of the 7 4th level spells in the player's handbook do use concentration. If you're allowed to use older content, Guardian of Nature is a pretty good spell. And by this point, even though we're hitting our first core class improvement to Hunter's Mark, we're probably only using Hunter's Mark if we need to conserve resources, or we're out of resources, or we drop concentration on our main spell, or if for some unfortunate reason the subclass that we picked requires us to use it. In my opinion, that's a big ew, although if you want to play that way, it's fine. Moving on to level 14, we get Nature's Veil, and what this does is, as a bonus action, we can give ourselves the invisible condition until the end of our next turn, and we can do this number of times per long rest equal to our Wisdom modifier. The old feature that we got at this level let you hide as a bonus action here. This is definitely better. But this is also kind of our invisibility feature that's been buffed a little bit and then moved back 4 levels. It used to the normal level 10 feature would only last until the start of our next turn, and it is nice that this invisible condition doesn't have any conditions on how it's going to end, which is nice. So what you could potentially do with this, you take your bonus action first on your turn to make yourself invisible, you do some attacks, and then on your next turn you're still invisible and you can do some more attacks, and you could potentially chain this if you wanted to. So potentially a very powerful feature for both defense and offense, and this is potentially on-demand advantage for at least maybe 3 to 4 rounds, depending on what your Wisdom modifier is. At level 15 is a subclass feature, and these are the subclass capstones. They're usually pretty impactful, although the power level on them ranges pretty wildly. Some of them are much better than others. At level 16, it's our 4th ability score improvement, and nothing else, much like level 12. At level 17, it is 5th level spells, 6 free uses of Hunter's Mark per long rest, and we get Precise Hunter, which says we have advantage on attack rolls against the creature marked by our Hunter's Mark. Having 5th level spells is a big deal. There are a lot of pretty powerful ones on the class list, although utility are probably going to be your top performers other than upcasting. I think generally speaking, advantage is pretty easy to obtain for most characters at this point. Like, for example, we could just use Nature's Veil. So I don't see Precise Hunter as necessarily the biggest deal, but again, it makes for a solid backup plan, and this is an improvement to that backup plan. At level 18, we get Feral Senses, which gives us blind sight out to a range of 30 feet. This is basically simplified and made much more clear than the 2014 version was, and this is a decently strong feature, although its usefulness is situational depending on whether or not there are things that are difficult to see. At level 19, it is our final ability score improvement or feat, and you can take epic boons here now if you want as a level 19 character, and no changes here, and you are at your max spellcasting ability at this point with 15 prepared spells and, 2 5th level spell slots. Finally, at level 20, we get the class capstone, which is called Foe Slayer, and all this does is increase the damage dice of our Hunter's Mark from a D6 to a D10. This is better than the previous versions of Foe Slayer, but in my opinion, this is still a pretty poor class capstone. Again, this is improving the backup plan for our character. I think generally speaking, most Rangers should be using their concentration for more impactful spells than Hunter's Mark. Ideally, you never need the backup plan, which is one of the reasons why I don't really like any of the features that improve Hunter's Mark. And I could easily see skipping this feature for a multi-class dip, as I think you'll probably get more from a single level in another class than you will get from this. And we'll talk a little bit more about that right now as we go into multi-classing the Ranger. So the requirements to multiclass the Ranger, you need at least 13 Dexterity and 13 Wisdom if you want to take a level outside of Ranger, or you want to take a level in Ranger if it's not your first class. If you take a level in Ranger and it's not your first class, you'll get proficiency in light and medium armor, shields, martial weapons, and 1 skill from the Ranger class list, and the Ranger counts toward your caster level by your Ranger level divided by 2 rounded up. Used to be your level over 2 rounded down, so this is a big change. So everything that you get from a single Ranger level, you get a caster level, you get 3 spells prepared, one of them is going to be Hunter's Mark, you get a Ranger class skill, you get weapon masteries, and you get weapon and armor proficiencies. And this is a lot for a single level, and in my opinion, the Ranger has pretty significant dip appeal now. Now, the classes that the Ranger goes best with. In my opinion, it goes best with Cleric, Druid, Fighter, and Rogue. All of these kind of match the stat requirements of the Ranger to some degree. So you have Wisdom casters in the Cleric and Druid, and potential Dexterity marshals in the Fighter and Rogue. Cleric and Druid in particular are great classes to jump out of Ranger into something else because they offer increased spell casting abilities. These classes can also use a single level of Ranger to potentially get armor and weapon masteries without sacrificing their overall caster level, which is a potential big deal. You can jump off into Fighter and maybe Rogue if you want to enhance the class's martial abilities. These classes, if you dip Ranger on them, can get grace use out of the spells, and Rogue can potentially get a lot of use out of the armor and shields. Now, if you want to play a Ranger and you want to multi-class into another class, I would probably do it. There's a few kind of key breakpoints. Level 5 or 6 in Ranger is a good place to stop. Maybe level 9 or 10 would be my next point. Maybe level 12. And then if you're going to go past level 12 in Ranger, I would probably stay Ranger for a ways. But generally speaking, if you're going to dip a Marshal that has extra attack, you don't take more than 4 levels. And you can take a lot of levels in Rogue. That is a very nice way to scale your damage. Or you can go with one of the Wisdom full casters on a build that has a lot of Ranger levels. Now, Ranger can also work with Bards, Monks, Sorcerers, Warlock, and Wizards, although these classes are mainly ones that want to dip Ranger. Ranger doesn't necessarily want levels in these classes. And that's mainly due to stat requirements. So the Monk in particular can use Ranger pretty well because it likes having the weapon masteries, and the spell slots are useful, and in high single target damage scenarios, Hunter's Mark is a lot of damage that a Ranger dip can give a Monk because it's a d6 per hit, and Monks make more attacks generally speaking than any other class in the game. Now, the other classes here on this list, the Bard, the Sorcerer, the Warlock, and the Wizard, these are all classes that might have wanted to dip Cleric under the 2014 rules for armor proficiencies. However, under the 2024 rules, these classes can dip Ranger instead and also get weapon masteries. Now, the spell list isn't as good as like the Cleric list, but it is an option. Paladin is probably a better option for the Charisma classes here, so the Bard, the Sorcerer, and the Warlock, but the Ranger is still a good option. Essentially, it's not really a 13 dex and a 13 wisdom requirement, because if you wanted to get medium armor, you're probably going to have a 14 dex anyway, so you already meet the dex requirement, so you basically only need to spend points on your point buy to get wisdom if you're already planning on using medium armor. So if you're playing any one of these caster classes and you want weapon masteries and medium armor, the Ranger is actually a really interesting class to look at. I think the only classes that probably don't have any situational usefulness for a Ranger dip are Barbarian, because the casting doesn't really work and they already get masteries, and the Paladin, as it's 2 multiple attribute dependent. You're going to need at least 13 and 4 stats for that character, and you'll probably want a decent constitution as well. So interestingly here, the new Ranger can go pretty well with almost anything in the game, although admittedly some of these dips are pretty circumstantial. All right, so let's move into our summary and ratings. So under the 2014 Ranger, I gave them a 3 in offense, 3 in defense, 2 in control, 3 in support, 4 in skills, and 3 in complexity. Now, for the 2024 Ranger, for offense, I'm still going to give them a 3-star rating here. So, although some of the abilities the Ranger used under the 2014 rules commonly, like the Crossbow Expert plus Sharpshooter combo, got nerfed, the Ranger did get weapon masteries. They can do Great Weapon Master with heavy ranged weapons. So I think overall they're in about the same place for their relative damage dealing capabilities, especially considering their casting abilities. So I'm going to leave them here at 3 stars. For defense, I am also going to be keeping them at 3. Defensively, the core class hasn't really changed. You've got a large hit dice, you've got armor, you've got some defensive spells like absorb elements. There are also better options to boost your defense pretty much readily available now. You've got things like the defensive duelist feat, magic initiate wizard for shield, as well as the mage slayer feat to boost your mental saves. Ranger's core class saves are pretty poor, and this is one of the defensive weaknesses of the class. You might want Resilient Constitution, Mage Slayer, and maybe even Warcaster as well, although in that case you've used 3 feats and you're not really going to have room for a weapon feat and capping your decks and having an epic boon. So the feat situation, they are stretched pretty thin. So yeah, I would say I leave them at a 3 on defense. For control, again, I'm going to be leaving them at a 2. I think their control is an eensy bit better thanks to weapon masteries and potentially having more slots available thanks to favored foe, but I don't think it's enough to warrant 3 stars. Rangers also don't really get the premium control options, at least on the druid list, that they have a lot of overlap with. Their best control spells are kind of like area denial or delay, like stalling spells such as spike growth or plant growth. Moving on to support, I am still going to give them a 3 stars. The Ranger has a decent amount of utility and kind of restorative spell options to heal and like remove conditions and that kind of thing. And they can be especially useful for party exploration and infiltration efforts. The ability to swap 1 spell per long rest does make it easier to prepare those situational support spells when you can anticipate the need for them. Before, I really don't think you wanted to take them because you could only change your spells out on whenever you leveled up and you had a lot fewer spells prepared. So I don't think they necessarily had room to squeeze in as much situational utility as you do now. I would say they were a low 3 on support before. I think they're a stronger 3 now, but they're not on the level of many of the other full casters. Now, in terms of skills, I'm going to give them a 4 stars here, but I think their skills are actually better than they were in 2014. I'm going to give them a higher 4, basically. 3 total skill expertises instead of 1 is a big deal, and the spell list, again, is a boost overall to their kind of skills abilities. They're not on the level of the Bard, nor do they have the eventual kind of performance floor that Rogue gets with reliable talent. And like with many things that the Ranger does, they're good at this, but they're not the best, and this is pretty much true for just about everything that this class does. And finally, complexity. So this is a measure of how difficult the class is to play, and it's pretty closely related to how many choices the class has and how difficult those choices are. I think Ranger is one of the more complex martials simply due to the fact that they have spells. Their overall complexity, though, I think is pretty similar to what it was in 2014. Given the concentration bottleneck kind of pulling you in 2 directions for where you want to use your concentration, and the ability to potentially swap out spells on a long rest now, there's still quite a bit of internal tension with the Ranger, but I don't think they're really any order of magnitude more difficult to play than they were in 2014. All right, so thanks for watching. This has been our summary on the 2024 Ranger. And even though the Ranger has the whole Hunter's Mark thing again, where it doesn't work with your high-level spell casting for concentration, I still think the Ranger is stronger than they were in 2014. The Hunter's Mark features are really extra. They're things that we got when we didn't have anything else. And we didn't lose relevant features for them. I think it's a bit of a shame to have the invisibility delayed from level 10, level 14, and the ability to ignore difficult terrain. I might feel that, although I think a lot of people probably wouldn't really care. Additionally, the kind of classic tactic of the Ranger using archery as a whole was nerfed across the board for pretty much all characters, although you can potentially pull off a ranged build if you're clever with Great Weapon Master, and this is something that is on my to-do list. Also, the dual-wielding archetype that there was the main thing for the Rangers. This has been made much stronger, although it naturally has more risk due to being in melee. So we're going to be doing Rogue next, but if there are any comments and thoughts you have on the Ranger, please let me know in the comments. I know that this class is one that is a bit controversial and people have very strong opinions on it. But I do think, even though in spite of the internal tension it has, the class is playable. So once again, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.